Right, well, it's a miserable wet Saturday at the beginning of October 2021, and certain circumstances mean that I've ended up with this our Performance Classics Royal Enfield 350 Clipper Racer in the house. So while it's in here, it probably won't be able to stay here forever, so I thought I might as well have a look at it and say a few words about it. This machine basically started life right at the beginning of 2005, after I'd acquired a set of crankcases and bottom end parts and other bits for a 350 engine, and I realised that while we had a 500 Fury to race, when it broke down, if it did, we'd be at a race meeting with no other bike to ride. So I decided that we had enough bits and pieces lying around to build this 350 up, although not in the form we see it here. Basically, I tuned the 350 engine by putting a Meteor Minor sports piston in it and some hot cams from Hitchcock's. What else did I do? A bit of porting work on the cylinder head. I lightened the flywheels, of course. That's something I've done from the very beginning of me tuning these engines. We had a 4-speed gearbox on it with a close ratio gear set and some very hard clutch springs in there, and it wasn't the best bike on the planet by a long way, and it was a bit of a tail end Charlie. It could do 100 miles an hour, but that isn't what you need for racing. Actually, you need the acceleration and the braking and the cornering capabilities and everything else. But over the years, we improved it bit by bit until it became what we see here. It acquired a 5-speed gearbox early on in its career, and actually got excluded from scoring points because of that. Someone raised a complaint. Obviously, having the old 4-speed Albion gearbox is quite a handicap and quite an advantage to machines of all sorts of different makes competing with it. So a lot of people perhaps didn't like the fact that we had a 5-speed gearbox on this, but eventually the ruling that excluded it was overturned and we were allowed to run with it. So there we have it, and that 5-speed gearbox has actually got slightly different ratios inside it than you would get on the standard Indian gearbox, which is what it started life as, where you have a very low first gear and then a big jump to second. This has got a higher first gear, and all the gears up to top gear are all closer and higher than they would have been in a standard one, so that's a bit special as well. What else can I say about this? This engine we see in it here, I have got another engine for it which looks closer to standard. This engine is our short stroke engine, and it's basically a 500cc engine with a 500cc bore, which we just did calculations and short stroked until we got the 350cc, and that enabled us to use the same pistons as we do in the 500. The pistons are designed by my brother, and they've been made specially for us, and we've also got the 500cc Fury big head fitted, which enables us to use much larger valves and ports than you'd ever be able to with the standard 350 head. And the carburetor there is actually an 1.5 inch GP carburetor, and we'll go and take a closer look at that. Again, I've been able to use that because of the massive cylinder head and port and everything that we've got there. Here it is, and you can probably just about see from this side we've also got twin float chambers on it, fed by 2 taps, one from either side of the tank. I'll be turning the bike around in a little while anyway, and we'll get a better look at the other side. But you can clearly see there's the Fury big head. We've actually now got titanium valves in there, but with the short stroke and the nature of the conrod and the piston and everything else we've got in there, you can see we've got a cylinder barrel there that's only 5 fins high. So that means we've also got ultra short push rods in there compared with what you'd normally have, especially in a big head engine, which would have even longer push rods than a standard 500 engine would do. So we've got very short push rods in there, and this engine even prior to having the titanium valves fitted, was capable of revving past 9,500 RPM. It peaks power at about just short of 8,500, but it's still clear of 30 horsepower going past 9,000. So we decided that somewhere the other side of 9,500 revs, we're not quite sure where, but at a guess maybe about 10,500, 11,000, the valves were getting in trouble with the piston. We noticed this at Liddon Hill, where he would be coming up to the coming around the tight bend up to the hill, and if he missed a gear going up the hill, he was flat out in second and changing up to third, and if he missed a gear, that was it, the engine would stop, we'd have bent valves or other damage. So we needed a rev limiter, and we knew that the power was already falling again by 9,500, so that's where we had it set, and it seems to work quite well for us. The other thing about this engine is it produces about 34 brake horsepower at the rear wheel, which is what the last more sort of ordinary engine also produced. But where the old engine with the standard, say standard bullet head, I mean obviously I'd done quite a bit of porting work, as much as you can with it, but it had standard size valves, which incidentally are the same size as a standard road going 250 Crusader. The previous engine, that was more sort of 350 bullet or clipper like, if you like, with its full 90mm stroke and 70mm bore, would produce its 35 or thereabouts horsepower at the rear wheel at about 7,500 RPM, and it wasn't even really willing to rev to 8, which all sounds great and is all well and good, but the advantage this engine's got, although it's not really any more powerful at the rear wheel, or so it would seem on the dyno, is it's clear of 30 horsepower from perhaps 5,000 RPM right to the other side of 9,000, whereas the previous engine climbed steeply and sharply to its 35 horsepower and then dropped off a cliff. So you've got a lot more power on tap for a lot more sort of spread of the rev band with this engine, and that's what makes it so handy. And with the close ratio 5-speed gearbox, and being so light, because this is basically a Crusader 250 rolling chassis that we've got it in, it makes for a really handy, nimble and quick bike, and it's great fun to ride, and that says a lot, I think. I mean, I don't race, I've never raced, but I've ridden a few race bikes when I've worked on them and tested them, and some of them have been quite uncomfortable and out horrible even to ride, and you just don't feel happy on them and you can't enjoy them. But this is a bike that actually puts a smile on your face when you ride it, and the whole package, the engine, the handling, the braking. We've got a 7-inch single leading shoe front brake on there, which is just like you get on the late Crusaders and 250 Continental GTs and so on. This brake can actually raise the rear wheel of the bike off the deck, so you've got pretty much as much braking as you like or need to have, really. I've vented it, we've got these massive holes here. I'll turn the bike around shortly, but we'll have a look on the other side. You can see standard sort of Continental GT type air scoop, but I've also drilled these radial holes in the hub there for more ventilation, and it also sort of makes the brake slightly self-cleaning, because it often comes in after a race and you'll see the black from the brake dust on the wheel rim there, so it cools nicely, it cleans itself. That works really well. And I've also gone to great lengths to make sure that both wheels spin nice and freely when the bike's supported off the ground. And all these little things add up to make a tremendous little package, for not great expense compared to some of the bikes it competes with. You know, it's certainly no Manx Norton in terms of what it costs to build, although over the years, I was going to say, probably lots of money has been spent on it as we've gone through engine developments and changes and work along the way in progress. But we've had the satisfaction and the enjoyment of creating something from literally parts I had lying around in the shed. I think I had a Crusader frame, I had some hubs, I got that first engine in sort of bits from a guy at a meeting in Cadwell in late 2004 and decided we had enough to form the basis of another machine, just to sort of have a machine to fall back on and 2 bikes to race instead of 1. And I never dreamed that it would evolve into this, which has actually won plenty of races. Very often, if not always, gets in the top 3 or 4. It's won a championship in 2018. It set a lap record on Anglesey in 2018, where it actually broke the previous standing record for the preceding 9 years 3 times in one race. And that lap record was set by a fast guy on an AJS 7R350, and it might have even possibly been a 3-valve version, we're not sure. But even if it was just a 2-valve version, the guy that was on it was a very well respected and fast rider, and my brother Ian, riding this, actually finally broke his lap record for a pre-62 350 on Anglesey, and that still stands at present at least. I think I'll put the camera down here now, and we'll turn the bike around, and I shall perhaps even get in behind it and just show off my Royal Enfield t-shirt, which I need to thank Herman for, so thank you, Herman. Here it is, very nice, thank you. Let's get this bike turned around and we'll take a look at the other side. Coming around. And there it is. Now take a look at it from the other side, and we've got a crossover exhaust system on it. Now some people comment and ask about that, and that is actually partially due to us wanting a given length of exhaust pipe for the critical tuned length that we wanted, and in order for it not to overhang too far towards the rear, we've crossed it so we can fit in a lot more length of pipe without actually going in a straight line out behind the bike and maybe having a pipe that's too long to meet the regulations. So that's what that's all about. I can give you the bore and stroke. We're 84 by 63. That is 1mm shorter than a Triumph Tiger Cub 200. So that gives you some idea of how over square this engine is. And in fact, when I first had the idea of doing this, I wasn't sure that it would work. I didn't know whether it'd even really have the capability or the ability to even run. Never mind run as well as it does. Although I'll admit that while there's not a great deal of power south of 5,000 RPM, it starts getting going a bit around 3,000 and then climbs steadily. There's no flat spot at all anywhere, and then by 5,000 it's really sort of dug in and it's starting to go for it, and then that power just builds and carries on, like I say, all the way to the other side of 9,000 RPM. So a very, very useful engine, this one. What else can I tell you about it? We've got the because it runs in the pre-62 British Historic Racing Championship category, it's got to have much of what it's made up of has got to be sort of stuff that was available to Royal Enfield in-house at the time, which is one of the reasons why we've got that 7-inch single leading shoe brake. But trust me, I've got that set up. That is very, very strong, that, and it will pick up the rear end of the bike if you pull the lever hard enough. The forks, well, we've got the Royal Enfield fork legs and we've got the Royal Enfield fork yokes. We managed to smuggle some nice two-way damped internals into them, and I've also modified them for adjustable preload there. We've got those Allen bolts, actually you can screw them by hand, but they bear on little bobbins I've got on top of the fork springs, and you can just screw them down to increase the preload should you want to. But I think more often than not my brother Ian runs with no weight on them at all, but it's there should it be needed. Standard hubs front and rear, and I built the wheels myself with alloy rims on and stainless steel spokes. What else can we say about it? Oh, here's the other float chamber on the other side of the carburetor. We have of course got a self-generating electronic ignition on it, and that's got a built-in rev limiter which we needed to protect the engine, and the actual sort of rotor and stator are inside there, running in oil with the clutch, which is one of the Burton bike bits, aluminium clutch baskets on an ordinary 5-speed centre with ordinary plates. Apart that the Burton bikes kit has its own specified friction plates, but we've got the standard plain plates in there, and the clutch action is actually nice and light. Look at that, that's one finger there. That clutch doesn't bite, doesn't slip or drag or bite too sharply. It's nice and smooth and progressive. Again, you don't want a clutch that's too heavy when you're racing because it will become tiresome. So everything on this bike works really well together. And the frame, incidentally, the Crusader type frame, what I did is I heated up the front down tube here right at the top, and I moved the bottom mounting point of the down tube. If you notice, I've kept the two. Lots of people that use Crusader type frames cut them there, and I wanted to keep both. So what I did is I heated the tube there, bent it forwards, and this one, the bottom of the two mounting points, has moved forwards 3/4 of an inch over standard. I got my brother to weld in. We've got, let's see if I go around here I can show you what it is. We had a scrap Crusader frame that was badly bent. We cut off one of these rear shock mounting points and we took it round the front, where it can just be seen, but it was welded in there just to sort of brace below and behind the headstock a little and meet up with the little bracing tube that the Crusader frames have. Again, those bracing tubes, which you can't probably really see, but it is there. A lot of the time they get cut out when people fit bullet type engines to Crusader frames, but I wanted to keep all that, keep the front end of the frame loop as strong as possible. And we also added, again, my brother welded them in, we've got an extra down tube coming down here, as you would have on the older early 50s bullets and clippers and so on. We've got that down tube coming down to the top of the gearbox, which you wouldn't normally have in this type of frame. And also we've got tubes there running from near the bottom of that extra tube back to this rear frame loop here on both sides. So that really stiffens up the whole rear end and ties it in nicely to the engine, which is still a stressed member of the frame, and gives a very stable, predictable handling. I'm told by my brother who races it that it doesn't handle quite as well as his featherbed frame 500, but it certainly handles very well for what it is. And unlike the featherbed frame 500, we've never, touch wood, had any cracks appear in this frame, which from time to time we get in the featherbed with the 500 in it. So what that tells you, I don't know. I would have thought the featherbed frame was stronger, but maybe it's too strong, and perhaps this frame allows that little bit of flex that sort of absorbs and soaks up and dissipates the vibration. I don't know. Although that said, it's also a very smooth running engine, whereas the 500 can feel quite harsh in comparison, so perhaps that's another reason, I don't know. But here we are, that's it, the Performance Classics 350 Royal Enfield Clipper. And yeah, lastly I'll just explain, we call it the Clipper because, well, you hear of a 350 clipper beating Manx Nortons and Gold Stars and things, that sounds fantastic, and that's one of the reasons. But another reason is you can't say that it's not a clipper. Had we called it a bullet, someone could have said, well, no, that's not a bullet, that's a bullet engine in a Crusader frame. But there were clipper versions of the bullet and there were clipper versions of the Crusader, so we really can safely call this a clipper. And this is a bike that, believe it or not, certainly if not the early 60s, but by the mid 60s, Royal Enfield could have made this, because pretty much everything you see there they had to hand. And I always like to think that perhaps if I'd been involved in some way, if I'd been around at the time with Royal Enfield back then, that perhaps they could have produced the Continental GT 250. They had the 500 Fury for export, but they could have made this in between the two, and a name I would have given it would have been the Continental TT. But there we are, it's the only one of its kind in the world, and we built it, and we race it, and what a lovely little thing it is. So there it is, a small bike that Royal Enfield themselves could have possibly produced in, if not the early 60s, the mid 60s for certain, as all the parts, or very nearly all the parts you see here that make up this machine, could have been put together to make something like this. And it's just a shame really that perhaps they didn't think about it, perhaps they missed a trick, I don't know, but they would have had something that could have given any 350 Gold Star a run for its money, and even probably been up there with the AJS 7Rs and the 350 Manx Nortons of the day, and it could have been a nice basis of a little production racer, or a very, very fast and fun road going bike to complement the little 250 Continental GT. And if I'd have been around at the time, I'd have probably named it the Continental TT. But there we are, it's a machine that never happened, and as far as I know, we built and own the only one of its kind really, but it was so easy to work out and put something together like this. I think Royal Enfield's history could have probably been completely different had they thought of or done something like this themselves. There you go, I give you the Performance Classics Royal Enfield 350 Clipper Racer.